Hi there, good morning everyone out there in Facebook land, my friends and family from around the world. This is Dawn coming to you still from Ubud, Bali as we build toward the Bali Spirit Fest, where I'll be teaching women's ceremony and tarot. And so I'm excited about that. And for those of you who are going to be here, hi, who's here? Hi, Alicia. Good to see you here today. I look forward to visiting you with you again next week. So, hi Gwen, welcome. So I'm over here in my little apartment that I've rented in Ubud and having a beautiful time here, really, and very grateful to be here. And so today I want to share with you, as usual, I picked a card this morning and then went into meditation. And this morning it was very interesting because I picked the card and I had a sort of resistant energy to it, but as soon as I dropped into meditation, all of this insight started flowing and I had to like come back out and write, and then I'd go back in and I'd get something else and come back out and write. So what I've got for you is pretty juicy and interesting, actually. And so let me just tune in for a minute and notice if there's any other sort of frame up or information I want to share before we go into the theme and the message of the day. So give me a moment here. So the only thing, we go right into it. The question I have for you is, where in your life are you compromising and not happy about it? So here's the card. I'll show you the card. So this card is the Six of Rainbows, which correlates with the Six of Earth in a more traditional deck. And the word is compromise. And it's funny because when I've pulled this card before, and I right away got it's like a disjointed feeling, like because I think sometimes we think of this word compromise as a positive thing, and yet at the same time we know that underneath it isn't. It's not a positive thing. So I actually looked up the word. So first I got the download, and then I meditated, and then I looked up the word right before we started. But I want to start with the definition. An agreement or settlement of a dispute that is reached by each side making concessions. So I think the word compromise has come to be applied to sometimes things that don't matter so much, like, okay, I compromised with my teenage son and said, look, if he cleans up his room, I'll let him stay out later on a Friday night. That's a concession, yes, but it might not hold weight in a way that is disturbing. But when we look at this card, the faces on these two old samurai kind of say it all. I hope you can see that. Hi Denise, hi Joe, welcome, hi Michael, good to have you here. These are like, look at how sort of, they don't look happy. These guys aren't like high-fiving, yeah, we came to compromise. No. They've made concessions and they're unhappy about it. So now I want to read to you, hi, thanks for the love. I want to read to you what came to me. So as I said, for those of you who are just jumping on, I got this card and I got that like, compromise, it's supposed to be a good thing, right? So why don't I feel good inside by looking at it? And I went into meditation, and this is immediately what came, and I had to come out of meditation and write this stuff. An uneasy truce. Thank you for the love, Alicia. An uneasy truce. Compromising to keep the peace. And then I got, compromise is not win-win. Haha. Now we're going to really dive in here, and we're going to dive into an area that I teach on, or that I'm really learning about, but that I weave into my retreats, and I'm going to be weaving even more because the message is coming strongly that I need to develop my skills here. Compromise may stabilize for a time, but in the end, neither party actually gets what they want. And often this is due to a lack of understanding, a lack of skills, a lack of reason, or a lack of logic. So let me unpack that a little before I go further with what I wrote. When we don't know how to use the tools of nonviolent communication and compassionate listening, and we have been we've lost our ability to think logically through things, and we respond with reaction from an egoic defensive state, we are not resourced to come to win-win situations, and we're not resourced to be creative in our problem solving. And so instead we default to compromise. And again, compromise only lasts so long. And then things get uneasy. And if it's the ego that is doing the compromising, they're going to also keep score. And it's sad to say, I saw a lot of that in my first marriage. Of course, we both did it, and we didn't know at the time. We were very unconscious. But there was a lot of things where, well, I, as the wife, often compromised, and I'm sure that in retrospect he might say the same, but there were a lot of compromises to what I truly desired and who I was wanting to be in order to keep the peace. And again, he might say that too, and I think a lot of relationships, intimate relationships, can find that can happen. The trouble is it only lasts so long. So let's see what else I say here. When ego is running the show, compromise, which will feel like sacrifice, and in a way it kind of is. Compromise for the ego is about as good as it's going to get, because the ego doesn't want to give any ground, and the ego's job is to protect and defend, and not necessarily to have that ability to open up and explore win-wins and be vulnerable, which is what's required. But make no mistake, the ego will keep score. And this, I think, is the ultimate issue, is that when we have an uneasy truce, the ego is keeping score. And one look at this picture really illustrates it. I mean, these guys, they're touching pinkies, and in a way they're really mirroring each other. But you can look at the look on their face. They are not trusting each other, and they are not in any kind of open embrace of availability. They are on edge. They're samurai. So, the samurai, what's the history of the samurai? It was all like war through intrigue and infiltration and sneakiness, and how can I get one up? I mean, it was all this sort of art of strategy, right? So there was no like, oh, I really want to share my feelings right now about this so we can come to peaceful win-win. No. So we really are being called as humans, as we're called to elevate our consciousness, to find new ways to problem solve. And so anyway, so compromise in any major impactful agreements, and we're talking about on the global scale as well as in our intimate lives, is like a noxious gash which will eventually erode peace and trust. So I had this image of these a couple in compromise and living together, and then this noxious green gas coming under the doorways and eroding the love in the relationship. And that's very much the image that I had a few years after my divorce from my first marriage, was that green gas that eroded trust. But I didn't understand this whole compromise piece of it the way I understand it now. Okay. So then what do we do about that, right? It's not enough to see the problem. We have to begin to find new ways of communicating, new ways of finding win-win situations, new ways of feeling enough trust and safety to share our vulnerability. And that it requires skills and tools, actually. Fortunately, there's a great man who was ahead of his time. He's passed now. His name is Marshall Rosenberg, or his name was Marshall Rosenberg. And he developed a body of work called Nonviolent Communication that is, I bow deeply to this man and to his work, that brought people to the table who were hateful enemies, and even on a global scale. So His work is, you can look at his work online in YouTube, and you can read his book, Nonviolent Communication. Hi, Susan. Great to have you here. So let me just very briefly here summarize some of the possibilities of solutions to or explorations of how do we go from the uneasy truths of compromise, where we are actually making concessions that only will last so long, to actual win-win situations. And again, for those of you who are joining, here's our card for the day. 6 of Earth, compromise, uneasy truths. What is required are the tools of compassionate listening and the willingness to stick it out, in other words, in conversation, in relationship, in order to get to that win-win. And of course, this requires both parties to want to do that, or all parties. Because if it's only one of you who wants to create a win-win, it's not going to work. And I've learned that lesson the hard way a few times as well. So where both or all parties have their needs met. So win-win is not the same as compromise. Win-win is creative problem solving. So compassionate listening is the first thing, so that all parties feel heard and so that their needs are taken into account and so that they feel that they do in fact have an equal say in the outcome, in the creative problem solving. So what's required is creativity. What's required is patience. What's required is trust and compassion and a willingness to find a solution. So often this has to do with how important the relationship is, quite honestly. So if you have two parties, hey May, good to see you here. So if you have two parties, let's say a marriage, and you really want to work it out in this marriage, then you will come to the table making an effort to stick it out with that person. And to find creative solutions. So here was my summarizing thing. So we have the word compromise, which is about making concessions for what my guidance told me is often an uneasy truth and not an actual solution. So what needs to happen instead of, what's the higher octave of compromise in relationships, between nations, between parents and kids, between communities, within communities? Creative solution finding, compassionate listening, and communicating respectfully and from the heart. So if you are one of the kind of folks who spends time in like community conversations, like I'm thinking about like when there are different proxies, like in local government, that kind of thing, and you go to some of these meetings where there's going to be a vote on something, and I mean, this is not my expertise, but from what I've heard and know, many small communities, man, it's like a poop flinging forum where nothing really gets accomplished because there's no respectful communication. People don't communicate from the heart in a respectful way. They mudsling, and they fight for their agenda because it's the ego saying, I must be right, I must have my way. And so I'm not saying that I have all the solutions. This is a process, and this is a growth edge that we as humans need to begin to step into. Hey, Angelina, welcome. So to catch you up, the card of the day is compromise. And we're looking at uneasy truth versus nonviolent communication, compassionate listening, and creative solution finding. So rather, you'll notice I phrased that specifically, not creative problem solving, because that looks at the problem. Creative solution finding. And ultimately, I feel that this comes to the willingness to come to a table of conversation, a virtual table of conversation between people that that steps in honoring self and honoring others. You're welcome, Angelina. One of the things I do each day, I do a little sacred action where I anoint myself as in my dedication to my sacred path as a spiritual teacher and a priestess. And when I anoint my chakras, and I anoint the bottom of my feet, and when I anoint my throat, I say, I anoint myself and speak that I may speak the truth, honoring the dignity of all. Now, this doesn't mean that I've got it right. This means that I call myself to that level of accountability. And I do feel that if we want to have more peace and love and prosperity and safety in the world for all, when it comes to compromising, that's actually only a low octave of what we really need, is to find win-win solutions. Now, do I know how to do that? No. What I can say is that I can point you to, or I shouldn't say no, I should say I'm learning. I'm a student on the path. But what I can do is continue to research, study, grow my skills, and invite others to join me on this journey of how do we speak our truth from our hearts and honor the dignity of all? How do we find creative solutions? How do we find win-win situations? How do we listen with compassion in the recognition that the other person is, like us, a human being who deserves to be treated with respect, even if they're acting like a jerk, actually. Recognizing, oh, look at that nasty ego there, but underneath that is a human being who wants to feel safe and loved and respected and understood. And how do we speak our own truth, and how do we communicate that in a way that's respectful? So again, I don't have answers, but I feel like these are really great journaling things to journal about, to explore for each individual human, and certainly for leaders. Leaders on all levels need to cultivate these skills, because people come our way and with all of their baggage that they want to unload on us sometimes. How do we deal with that? What do we do about that? So again, I want to refer you to my favorite resource in this arena, which is the late, great Marshall Rosenberg. You can look up nonviolent communication on YouTube and watch some of his amazing stuff. He's got these two puppets, the giraffe and the jackal, and amazing work he did with adults, and possibly with kids too, and with nations. And of course you can get his book as well, Nonviolent Communication. So with that, my dears, I want to invite you to explore how can you find win-wins where the convenient or easy. So with that, sorry, a call came in and it stopped my video. So with that, I send you bright blessings and much love. And please share a relevant comment below. If this speaks to you, by all means, or if there's someone you'd like to share it with, please share it with them. And let's see, let me just see, is there anything else? No, just as always, I invite you to check out my website and see if you're relating to this, if there's many things, there's many ways that I work with people, and I'd be happy to have a conversation with you. Thank you everyone, with much love until tomorrow. Mwah.